All right, welcome, Kofi Dalrymple. Thanks for agreeing to finally for us to do this. I know we've talked a lot about doing something like this together and sort of sharing our conversations with everybody else. I can start off with an introduction of myself. I'm Richard Bhola, uh, born and bred Guyanese, now living in the U.S.
Right.
For probably way too long, but here I am. Went to Saints. We went to Saints together for 5 years, and have been very close friends for over almost 3 decades
Yeah.
now, which I truly believe has enriched my life. So I should say thanks to begin the conversation. But sort of a little bit of background from a professional perspective. I'm an accountant. I've always been an accountant. I left since went straight into accounting, and I've done private and public accounting, Guyana, Barbados, and a couple of cities in the U.S. So that's sort of my specialty, and that's what I do. There isn't a whole lot that you can say about accounting to make it sound sexy, but I've certainly seen a wide variety of companies in terms of size and complexity, public and private companies. And so I would say that I have a somewhat deep knowledge of accounting, but learning new things every day, and in different industries, there's always different things to learn. So I'm excited to be here today to have this conversation with you, for us to sort of put our thoughts together, record it, and potentially share it with some people, and hope that it can enrich their lives.
Yeah. I'm Kofi Dalrymple, everybody. You just heard from Richard, one of my closest friends. Yeah. We go way back indeed, almost 30 years, back in Saints. And we were art students together. It was one of I guess the closest time, sort of towards the ending of our school life. After school, I went off to do engineering, University of Guyana, then went to do some natural resource management at the University of the West Indies. Then I was fortunate, got some opportunities to go on to do a PhD in engineering, worked in, environmental engineering, then moved into some sustainable energy engineering, with bioethanol. Some people might be familiar with some of the work that I did in that area as both a scientist and an engineer. And then I actually moved into working in the biopharmaceutical industry, worked for a company making vaccines. And I think that's a topical subject. Maybe we can have an opportunity sometime to talk about that. And I see there's a lot of fear about vaccines and things like that. And I think, Richard, that's one of the things we could probably contribute, in one of these conversations someday, talking about vaccines. And then moved out of the biopharmaceutical production space and got into engineering consulting. And now I do a lot of consulting for major companies throughout the US that want to build and set up biopharmaceutical facilities, whether it be things like monoclonal antibodies, vaccines, or medicinal products for animals, humans, and also what they call the industrial biotechnology field. So you want to make things like ethanol and other sustainable products. So that's sort of a quick introduction to some of the things that I've been involved in, just sort of in a nutshell. But the idea here is, like Richard, like you said, is to start having these conversations openly, because we're from Saints, but we have a very different background, right? I'm a countryman, you're a city man.
That's right. I'm a town man.
Exactly. I'm studying, and I went off into engineering, you went off into accounting. And so we come from a lot of conversations from very different perspectives, And even though we have a lot in common, as I said, you see this wide variance in sort of even the experiences we've had. I mean, we've even lived in sort of the similar places. We lived in Barbados for a little bit, then in the US, but different parts and we've pursued different things. But one of the things that is bringing us online is over all these years, we've had some amazing conversations. And it's because we come from a different perspective and different backgrounds. And that's one of the major reasons we're here, right?
Yep.
Right. We find ourselves having conversations, whether it's on the phone or a drive home from work. And we always end the conversation like, yo, I feel like we got to continue this conversation. Or I wish somebody else was part of this conversation, right? And we're always thinking about how do we share or expand this conversation, right? I see one of your little cutie pies walking by there, man. That's
that's the big boss. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that sentiment. I think it's you and I often talk about our like how we view the world and our role in it. And for a long time, people like you and a lot of other people that have been part of my life personally, I've always sort of like believed wholeheartedly that I am who I am because of interactions that you and I have and that I have with other people, right? And a lot of times it's we're having a conversation about something, right? We're sharing our experiences. And so as I think about how do we take what we gain from the conversations that you and I have and our personal development that comes out of that conversation, how do we share that with somebody else? Because I've always sort of felt like if people have shared so much with me, then how do I share a little bit of what I have with somebody else in order to help enrich their lives? And so that's sort of what we started talking about when we decided, okay, how do we share some of our conversations and then invite other people into the conversation? And that's sort of what brings us to this forum today to start the conversation on conversations,
right.
and sharing of conversations.
And that's a good point, right? We often talk about things that benefit us. And I think that's what friendship is about, right? Friendship is about having people in your lives that, in your life that are contributing to your life. They're not taking away from you, but they're adding to your life. And one of the things that I read recently, they said, the older you get, friendship becomes about quality and not quantity. It's better to have few friends who make an indelible impression in your life, as opposed to the culture that we live in, where sometimes we try to measure friendship by the amount of likes or the amount of friends that we have on a place like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or something like that, right? You could never lose that fundamental aspect of friendship, right? Which is the connection, the bond, and the contribution that people, make to your lives and you're making to other people's lives. And so when we have these conversations, we certainly talk about things that challenge each other. I mean, as an example, you are into, even when you went to school, you weren't a big athlete. But
nope.
Now, you WhatsApp me, hey man, just finished 5 miles, just finished 4 miles, right? And you ran a marathon. Was it this year or last year?
That was last year, yeah. I don't think anybody's run marathons this year. Maybe I could be wrong, but
maybe early in the
year. It's been a little bit of an interesting year. No, definitely. It's not to sort of veer off track, but when it comes to doing some of those things that you talk about, right, and sharing those different experiences, a lot of times I'm gaining the inspiration and the knowledge from somebody else, right? Yeah. And so it's like somebody that just taught me some stuff about running, or we talked about training for a marathon, or something that I might have remembered even from a young year. I remember when I ran that marathon, I messaged Salim and I was like, hey, I remember when we were on a trip together, and you were the guy that was running, and I was like, yo, that's so cool, this man could run. So here I am now when I'm running, right? So You know, you talk about friendship and that sort of lasting
Right.
impact. That's certainly part of it,
I
right?
mean, one of the reasons I mention it is because that aspect of your life has been sort of an inspiration to people like me, where now I try to run at least 2 miles a day. And if I don't do it, if I don't get to do it every day, you know, at least 3, 4 times a week. And one of the things that you continue to remember is, you know, if Bhola can do this, if Richard could do this, right? Is not right, then certainly it's an inspiration because I see the impact that it's had on your life. And it's something that, you know, in a way you copy from your friends, right? Hey, this man does a lot of running and I get out there and I'm not going to be running a marathon. I bet you that. That's not one of my goals, but my goal is to stay
Not,
healthy and run, and
not
you were an
yet, not
inspiration
yet,
for that.
not yet, Kofi. We'll talk about the
Not yet. Yeah, we'll figure that one out.
marathon.
You know, but the point is sometimes we talk about things that benefit us, but a huge part of the conversations that we've had, right, has been about, hey, maybe other people can benefit from this too. You know, how do you
Yeah.
share that, right? How do you share that inspiration? How do you share sort of the learning that you're having when you have these conversations, whether it's about a book you read, whether it's about something that has impacted you? How do we share these things so that other people can benefit, you know, as part of the conversation? So the whole idea, guys, the whole idea here is Rich and I are gonna have some of these conversations live. And whilst we are, you know, sort of inspiring each other and sometimes disagreeing with each other openly, the idea is that hopefully other people can join the conversation over time and we can sort of expand the conversation, right? That's really what we want to do. And the whole thing about conversation is important. I think human beings have realized now, particularly in this pandemic, how important the conversation is. We grew up in a country where we do a lot of talking, but we don't always conversate. You know, sometimes we do a lot of abusing, right? We do a lot of talking too. We do a lot of gaffing, right? But as Guyanese, in general, just speaking from our Guyanese background, having a conversation is an important thing. But just as human beings, right? Conversating is really, really important. It drives towards personal development, as we just talked about, right? Having conversations, listening to others, and being part of a conversation inspire us in terms of personal development. You just laid out a couple, right? We just use an example of health, for example. Business is also another great. Some of the best business ideas came up when people were talking. I mean, you had to talk.
Yep.
You had to share. Somebody go, that's a good idea.
Let's
Right?
start a business.
Exactly. And people started business. Politics and international relations. We're not going to say too much about politics right now because we're in a little hotbed.
It's a touchy time.
Exactly. But dialogue and conversation is really, really important to solving political problems between countries, between parties, between peoples, right? I mean, you have to have a conversation. It is the basis. I think the conversations, right, or conversating is the basis of all relationships. Like you can't have a relationship with somebody you don't talk to them.
Yeah,
Right?
definitely.
You have to communicate. And you have to conversate. You have to be in conversation with them. So relationships, conversation is very important to relationships. Talk a little bit about community development, right? Something that you're passionate about.
Yeah, I'll back up a little bit because I know you talked a little bit about sharing,
Right.
a little bit about what we know in conversations, but I think a lot of it too is learning from others, right? One of the things that I've come to recognize that it's so easy to get siloed, right? And
Right.
we could use politics as an example, or let's use conservative versus liberal views on life, right? We get siloed and we feed ourselves information that comforts us, right? We don't have to face the harsh reality that somebody has a different opinion from us.
Yeah.
And we're just really trying to find all those people that say, yeah, man, you were right. I with you. Let's do this, right? Those guys are, right? Versus entertaining a discussion where people are actually disagreeing with you but we're talking about that disagreement, right? We're learning from them something that we might not know. And very often it's deliberate, right? We sort of choreograph, who we're going to get information from and what sort of topics we're going to discuss. And I think sometimes we tend to just go along a path and tell ourselves, well, this is what I feel. I'm going to go find everybody else that agrees with me. And so that's sort of the importance of having those conversations. And I would actually say in a lot of cases, sometimes the most difficult conversations that you're part of is the best conversations, right? Because you're having a conversation with somebody that has a difference of opinion from yours, but you're doing it in a manner with mutual respect and an understanding that we're not trying to convince each other, right? We're just sharing our perspective, and I think you end up walking away in the moment uncomfortable, but sort of much more enriched as after the fact. But in terms of community development, right, and the conversation, I think this is something that I think about and I'm passionate about. You and I've talked about this before, but if you're not having conversations with people in your community, then you don't know sort of how much you can get done together, right? And so sometimes it's as simple as just starting the conversation on any topic, right? Just getting people together, I think, goes a long way in terms of helping each other out, right? I mean, your neighbor might just need, somebody to help them write their resume or to give them some advice on how to find a job. And so
Right.
if you're not having regular conversation and proper discussions with them, then it's hard to really move that from an individual level to a community level where you're having conversation with a wider group. So it's sort of this trickle-down effect, right? If we learn to have great conversations, if we sort of have some boundaries and some common understanding that we're not necessarily trying to get somebody else to agree with our opinion. We just want to share our perspectives, right? So that we come away with more knowledge and a greater sense of understanding. But most of all, like a respect for each other, right? Not because we disagree on something means that
And I mean,
we aren't sort of going after the same things, right?
All right, you're making a good point because a conversation is a two-way street, right? It's a dialogue, not a monologue. And like you said, you cannot be overly concerned simply with getting your point across. There has to be, you talked about mutual respect. There has to be a willingness to listen, right, to the other point. And listening is not, it's active listening, right? It's not the kind of listening where you're thinking of a rebuttal in your head for the last 2 points, and then you kind of miss what the individual is saying. One of the things that I am sort of interested in, and maybe it's because of my scientific background, is how complex communication is. I think the idea of just talking is actually, especially as the only species, right, on the planet that actually talk and communicate this way, what's interesting is that it's a complex process. And it starts with, let's say, for example, a thought. There are thoughts that are firing, neurons that are just firing in your head. And then you have to capture it. And once you capture the thought, you have to convert it from a thought into words. And not everybody is good at capturing a pure thought and then expressing it clearly. And so there's almost a loss in translation from just the capturing of the thought to the actual I'm saying it out, right? And you're going back and forth. Did I say that right? Because that might not be what you thought. You're like, I don't know if I'm saying this right. So you have to capture that thought first. And then once you capture it and you put it into sound, it has to go to the other person's ear and then go into their head and then basically get decoded back into a thought, right? And so the original thought that left your head So the thought that goes into the person who's listening could be a very different thought. And it could be a good thing, because I know that when we, in work environments, when we're ideating and you're throwing ideas out, they'll tell you no idea is a bad idea, because that process is so random and sometimes chaotic. You never know what will fire. You never know, what will collide. And maybe somebody's talking about one thing, you on a completely different thought goes off in your head. So usually it's a good thing. But when you're communicating and you're trying to be very clear, it becomes a very, very difficult thing. And that's why listening is really important, right? Because what you've got to be able to do is to connect on a level with people where the moment they start firing thoughts, right, you can begin to almost sense and understand as they begin to speak. It takes you some time. As someone starts speaking and talking, you start to understand, all right, I'm starting to tap into the way you think, to the point where I can start understanding your thought process. And when you get to that level, you can start to have deeper and deeper conversations, as opposed to some of the conversations that we see where someone just shoots something across and then hope that somebody gets it. Right? They just hope you get it. But your life experience, your knowledge, your ability to decode that information, right, could be very different and result in something completely different. People walk out the room and say, I can't believe you said that. You go, what did I say? What did I say? I can't believe you said that. Well, no, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. And so conversating is hard. Communication is very, very hard, even from a relationship perspective, right? And that's why I think the more we practice it, we get better, but we get to reap the benefits, right, of the conversation. We get to reap the benefits, all of the things that you just mentioned, right? This idea of being able to take thoughts from my head and communicate them to yours, and making that sort of psychological link, so that we could start sharing information, right, back and forth.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the listening aspect of it being key to conversation. And full disclosure, this is something that I struggled with for a long time. Just sort of always being excited to say something. And at the beginning of this year, I'm 40 years now, right? So I'm not a young dude anymore. But I wrote that down to actively engage in listening this year. Yeah. But what that comes with, I recognize, is some degree of personal vulnerability, right? Like, I have to be willing to say to myself, like, I don't have to have something to respond to what you were saying if I'm just trying to pay attention and listen to you.
Right.
And so that's my goal this year, to listen, right? And I say I'm 40 because of the fact that, like, it's taken me this long to recognize how important it is to just sit and listen, and all the information that I'm able to absorb, right? And I think in a conversation, we ought to feel like it's okay to just sit and listen. I've been part of many conversations where all I did was sit and listen, and my life was incredibly enriched at the end of that conversation, even though I didn't say something, right? And so I think you talk about just listening in the conversation, because a lot of times we don't listen, actively listen, right? Yeah. We hear somebody, right, and something might register. And funny enough, earlier this year as well, I was reading a book on training your memory, and the topic of remembering people's names. And they say the reason why a lot of times, because people generally say, well, oh, I'm just bad at names, and that's not true, because you're not listening, right? And so oftentimes you're trying to introduce yourself as somebody's introducing themselves, and so you don't get their name. Or even worse yet, you don't hear it the first time because you're not paying attention. And you don't want to ask them back because you know that you weren't paying attention, right? And so, like, I've gone out and actively, even if somebody introduce themselves and I don't hear their name clearly, I ask them again and I ask them to spell it. And so, and I recognize that, I moved into a new neighborhood and I saw my neighbor the other day, and like I just called his name out even without thinking about it, right? Because I had actually listened the first time. And so that's key, right? Because conversations aren't things that we ought to feel obligated that we always have to contribute to it, right? We might, you might be talking about engineering, and I certainly can't contribute to that conversation, and so it's on me to just sit and listen, right? And so that's a key ingredient of not, of the conversation itself, right? And so we have to keep being willing to just sit and listen, right?
No. I think we ought to. I think we have to sort of emphasize on that, right? That we talked about mutual respect, to have a good conversation. We talked about a conversation not being a monologue, it's a dialogue. It's a two-way street. Even if you're not, speaking back at times, the two-way street here is you're actively listening as well, right? And so as you listen, right, the information is moving back. Feel free to ask questions, right, for clarity. Say, hey, are you saying this? I want to make sure I'm understanding, because that's what you ultimately want, right? You ultimately want to be able to understand. And I think the emphasis on listening is really, really key, because listening is not just hearing, right? So there are two different things. Listening is not just hearing. There's one thing to hear, which is the actual mechanical perception of the sound, right? Listening is, as I said before, is allowing the sound that you have perceived, that you've now heard, to actually go through a process of registering and generating thought, right? Sort of being almost sort of like saving it, when you hit save on your computer, right? It's like saving the information so that you could now process and do something with the information. And I think having done that, you've listened. And then you try to match it with what the person's saying, and it's generating thought. So it's doing things. And I think that's one of the things that you want to do. And I think we can't overemphasize that, because I think a lot of people could benefit from this, whether it's in their personal lives, whether it's in business, whether it's in politics, whether it's in a relationship. Active listening to the point where you have to start not just listening to words, right? Body language is important. Trying to understand the person to the point where you say, they may not be saying it right, they may not be expressing it in the best way, but I want to be able to look past that and see, right, their intention, their motivation. I want to see past that so that I can really understand what it is they're actually saying. And I think listening is the method that allows us to get
there. Yeah, definitely. That's there's a lot to having a good conversation, and certainly a skill that we continue to refine among us. But it's maybe we can sort of move on to why we're having this conversation now at this juncture, and sort of sharing it with the rest, and our plans for continuing to engage. One of the things we do recognize, and this has become even more obvious to us now, since we've all been home, is that we're all connecting virtually, right? And we're having conversations from far places. And I think we always knew it was possible. Now it's obvious that it is. And so as we continue to leverage that, and you and I know this from earlier conversations we're having with other groups of people, as we continue to leverage this medium, we recognize that we can. And so part of having this conversation in the public space is sort of timely. There is certainly a lot of information out there in the virtual space. I like to call it two parallel worlds of sorts. That sounds a little bit more scientific than I probably would ever say, but it's true. And so there's certainly, I think, the recognition of a void of meaningful conversation, and more of a lot of, people kind of upset either with their personal circumstances or the political situation or the world.
Yeah.
And so I think these conversations, it doesn't necessarily take away from people's struggles, but I think it adds to hopefully enhancing people's lives for the better, right? And so this is sort of like a timely moment for you and I to take these conversations to the rest of the people that we know, and then as well invite some people to be part of the conversation, regardless of what the topic is.
Right.
But just sort of as we refine the process, expand on it a little bit.
No, that's good. I think you've laid it out nicely. I think that's kind of what we want to do with these sessions, right? The goal is to expand the conversation. The goal is to enjoy, but to expand the conversation, and the conversation can be expanded in multiple different ways, right? We can bring in more people. We can continue to talk about all the things that we often talk about, and hope that other people can benefit from the conversations that we're having. That's certainly two things. But we also believe that as we expand these conversations, right, we are going to be expanding ideas and perspectives on a range of different issues. Because I don't think there's anything that's off the table when you and I talk about, we have respectful conversations about politics, which is a hot topic today. We have respectful conversations about relationships. We have respectful conversation about, just almost anything, right? Health and a range of other issues. So the expanding ideas and expanding perspectives is what we want to do. Expanding knowledge, right? And it could be simple things. We talked a little bit about our background. There are things that you can contribute to, and I can talk to and speak to on a personal level. But there are things that we certainly don't know, and we can learn from other people, and we can bring those people in to have conversations with us and with our friends. So I think expanding our knowledge is a very important aspect of what we want to achieve here as well. Ultimately, Richard, what I'd like to see is through these conversations, the way they've benefited you and they've benefited me is expanding our limitations, right? Sort of throwing off, like if I'm putting this kind of my boundaries here in terms of my limitation, as you have these conversations, you start pushing off. As you said before, to use the example of running, when we were teenagers, we were filled with energy, but we weren't marathon runners. And now we are older, we find ourselves doing things that we never thought we could do, right? Because we have expanded our limitations. We have seen how, other people in our, sort of age group, and at our stage in life, have found ways to expand and to push those limitations back. So I think pushing beyond our limitations and sort of expanding our capability and our range of skills comes out of these kinds of expanding conversations as well. And ultimately, what we want to be able to do is use these conversations to expand influence, right? We want to influence other people to do positive things, right? We want to influence people to share, to have conversations, right? Whether in their homes, with their children, with their spouses, their significant others, their families, their communities, and expand that influence, right? Let us get into the habit of talking to each other and sharing with each other, particularly during this time, as you said, we have learned. But let's expand that influence in a positive way as opposed to really a negative way. Anything else you'd like to see coming out of this?
Definitely. No, and I mean, one of the things that you know, I know you and I recognize this because we do this, but this is not. It's not an incredibly difficult undertaking, right? I think it's sort of, and I know I've wondered for a long time. I mean, I wondered to myself why I don't have more public conversations, but also why isn't anybody else having these public discourses, right? Like we know the power, and a lot of people know the power of it, right? It's not an incredibly difficult undertaking. It's sort of timely, and there's a need for it in the world. And what I'd probably add is that a lot of times I think we discount. You talk about influence, right? We discount our ability to influence, right? And so, you know, there's a quote, right? Be the change you want to see in the world. And we've asked the question, right? Why don't we see more of it? And there is. It's not that it doesn't exist, but I think in different worlds and realms, it exists at different levels. I remember an example in Barbados where, you know, an accountant would take the budget, right? And most of us ordinary folks don't understand the budget and what it means to the you know, the average man in the street, or the lady selling plantain chip, or, you know, the bus driver, if we use our Guyana examples, right? And breaking it down, right? And having a public conversation and sharing it with everybody else, right? And all of a sudden now everybody sort of understands, well, okay, hold on, this is what the budget is going to mean to me directly, right? Not just a bunch of numbers that people are talking about in a world where, you know, everybody sort of understands what they're talking about. And so taking the conversation outwardly it's not a difficult thing, right? Like, it's not difficult for you to talk about engineering or how you became an engineer or why you're an engineer, or, you know, you talked about the vaccine earlier, right? And the process in developing a vaccine, to sort of share that information with somebody to let them realize, well, you don't have to be as scared of vaccines as you probably are, or maybe you do, I don't know. We'll cover that at a different time, but the point is sharing information sort of that we already have, getting other people to share what they already have. Then all of a sudden, you know, you got, you know, it's like, you know, it's like a potluck, right? Or a cookout, right? Everybody brings a dish and they share it with everybody else. And all of a sudden, everybody's got this variety of food, and, you know, they're excited. They get multiple experiences. And so I think that's what we're trying to do. And I, like I said, I'm excited because this is something that we get excited about when we talk about it. And so
right.
to have it with other people, and to get people's feedback, and again, people might have specific topics that they want to talk about. And I think that's great, right? Let's talk about that.
Right. And I wanted to end on that note. I think that's something you talk about. How do people get into the conversation? Yeah, it'd be good if you guys out there could, you know, send us topics that you think we should be discussing. If we don't know the answer, like I said, we've got our area of expertise. We can talk about those things. You know, I like to talk about housing and construction and the economy and politics, you know, and vaccines and science, and we can get deep into that stuff. And, you know, Richard's got a whole host of things he likes to talk about. There's accounting, personal development. He loves to talk about running. If you guys don't know anything about running, this guy's got all kind of running and biking gear. Right? This is the man here. But if there are topics that people want to talk about and we don't know, we'll go look for the right people and we can bring them in, and we'll sit down and we'll learn and we'll have a conversation about those things, right? Let's start talking, man. We've got friends all over the world, people all over that can come on here and we can have a good conversation about a lot of it.
Yeah, and there's no limit. You just pick it, right? Because and the thing is, right, people that have information always want to share it, right? I remember somebody telling me a long time ago that, you know, one of my friend's uncle had visited, and, you know, he's well read spiritually, and we sat there and, you know, we spoke for a couple hours that has somehow or the other been just a conversation that stuck in my head for a really long time. But he said to me, you know, you should come back, because there's nothing better than acquiring information than sharing it with somebody else. So to those out there that have any kinds of interest, right? If you want to learn about running, I could talk about running for the rest of my life. I could also talk a little bit about personal development and sort of, conditioning our minds, I think, to sort of get through different phases of life and how much probably little attention we pay to it. But a whole host of things, right? I think, and the idea is that if you feel like it's a topic that's going to benefit you, throw it out there, right? We know a few people, and we know people that know people. But also, there's a lot of people out there that are just ready and sort of waiting to share their information. I think it's always, everybody needs sort of an in, right? And we talked about, you're at a party and the music's playing and, nobody wants to start the party. Nobody's going out on the dance floor first. And the first time somebody goes out on the dance floor is full, right? And so I certainly think that once we start having these conversations and it's out there, I think people are going to get involved, because I know a lot of people that want to have conversations openly, right? We're no longer living in a world where people could tell us lies, we believe it. We could talk about it, right? Tell me about this, right? What do you think about it? It's like, Kofi, what is this story with this flu vaccination? I'll be taking the flu vaccine or not, right? Let's talk about it, because I might still decide I'm not going to take it, but I decide I understand a little bit more about what the vaccine does, right?
No.
So,
you know what? I think we really should. There's probably a couple of topical things. Maybe we will talk about vaccines and COVID-19 and what viruses are, and whether they're alive or dead and how they work. We could really get into that. And so, folks, we can have that conversation any day pretty easily. But if there are things that you guys want to talk about, like Richard said, drop them, and we'll pick them up, and we'll proceed and try to have a good conversation. One of the last things I'd say is the power of this platform, right? Of the virtual platform. I told my family, I've never been closer to my family. I mean, I'm closer to my family now. Probably the last time I've been this close, I'm talking about my relatives, my mom and brothers and sisters who live in Guyana. Not just Guyana, all over the world. Kind of, I got a sibling in St. Martin, in St. Lucia, in New York, and these places. And so I think what's cool is we took these platforms for granted. And then when COVID came and basically shut everything down, we realized that we could have been doing this all the time. We could have been talking to each other. We could have been having these conversations. And sometimes we use the physical separation as an excuse really to get into conversation with people. But I think we've learned that now from this entire situation, that we could really be on here having this conversation. There's no limit to it. And all those friends that we haven't seen the last 30 years, if we want to have a conversation with them, we should be able to call them up and say, hey, Jonas, let's talk, right? We may not have a physical bar to go and sit down at, or a physical place to go sit down and hang out, but this is it. This is the virtual space where we certainly can sit and chat and talk and exchange ideas and expand on our perspectives, our knowledge, right? And push those limitations back.
Good stuff. Yeah, no, I mean, I'll just say in the end, to anybody that's listening, thanks for your time. I know that time is sort of the most important thing, and hopefully by listening to this, you get as excited as we are. But that we continue to connect,
comment
directly or indirectly.
Comment down below. Let us know if you've got topics. Let us know what you think. We'll try to build this as we go. It's not going to be perfect, but over time we'll try to build it up, and hopefully we can get involved and expand our circle here and get to conversating, man. Expand the conversation.
All right.